Today let's talk about Patrick Bateman's colleague hierarchy in American Psycho. In the sterile, high-rise corridors of 1980s Manhattan corporate culture, few films have more sharply dissected the performance of masculinity and success than While the film is often remembered for its shocking violence and dark humor, what's equally compelling, and more psychologically insidious, is the internal hierarchy among Patrick Bateman and his cadre of fellow Wall Street vice presidents. David Van Patten, Timothy Bryce, Craig McDermott, and the socially awkward Carruthers. This essay will dive deep into the symbolic and psychological structure of their relationships. More than just background characters, these men form an unspoken pecking order that reflects and magnifies Bateman's internal descent into madness. Their hierarchy is based not on business success or intelligence, but on superficial metrics. The quality of one's suit, the thickness of business cards, who can get a reservation at Dorsia, who dates the most desirable women, and who dominates the room with the sharpest wit and coldest cruelty. At first glance, Bateman and his peers are virtually indistinguishable. All are white, wealthy, handsome men in their late 20s to early 30s, draped in Armani and powered by cocaine, working vague mergers and acquisitions jobs that nobody, including themselves, seems to fully understand. Their lives revolve not around work, but around presentation. The suits they wear, the women they date, the exclusivity of their social calendars, these are the true battlegrounds. This world is not just competitive, it's cannibalistic. And within it, a subtle but brutal hierarchy begins to emerge. Though they all hold the same job title, vice president, these men are far from equal in influence and control. Let's break them down. Patrick Bateman, our protagonist and unreliable narrator. Externally calm, internally deranged. Obsessed with status, validation, and murder. Timothy Bryce, the cocky alpha and cocaine addict. Loud, crass, but often the social ringleader. Craig McDermott, sarcastic, conservative, and judgmental. A loyal follower of groupthink, but not as dominant as he believes. David Van Patten, fashion-conscious and image-obsessed. Superficial to the point of parody, often contributes little except trends. Carruthers, a closeted gay man and clear outsider. Ridiculed, minimized, but ironically one of the few with genuine emotions. Bryce represents the most direct challenge to Bateman's status in the group. Where Bateman is cold, reserved, and meticulous, Bryce is loud, erratic, and flamboyant in his privilege. He often dominates conversations, mocks others, and pushes the group's direction, from restaurants to strip clubs to drug use. Bryce uses humor like a weapon, but it's not funny so much as it is strategic. He makes fun of others, especially Carruthers, and constantly inserts himself into conversations with wild, often inappropriate comments. This gives him a kind of alpha status, the class clown of Wall Street. In contrast, Bateman's humor is dry, understated, and often misunderstood. He's the straight man in a satire, surrounded by louder caricatures. In terms of sheer volume, Bryce leads. But in the silences, Bateman reigns. Bryce's frequent cocaine use speaks to both his excess and his decline. He's overcompensating, trying to stay ahead in a game he knows is meaningless. His dependence on drugs signals weakness to Bateman, who views emotional vulnerability or addiction as inferior traits. However, Bryce is often the one pushing for activities. He suggests clubs, invites the group out, and maintains the energy. Craig McDermott is a walking contradiction. Politically conservative, religiously biased, he makes an infamous anti-Semitic remark, and incredibly image-conscious. He doesn't lead the group, but acts as a barometer, mirroring Bryce or Bateman depending on what the moment demands. McDermott's crude jokes and outdated views reflect a man desperate to maintain control in a world moving too fast for him. He's judgmental but weak, a follower by nature. His sense of humor lacks the flamboyance of Bryce or the cold sarcasm of Bateman. He is the least fashionable of the group, and often mocked by implication. In the business card scene, a ritualistic display of hierarchy, McDermott is neither dominant nor innovative. He simply watches, dismayed as others outperform him. Bateman views McDermott as disposable. Van Patten is the most superficial of the group. His concerns are entirely aesthetic: suits, restaurants, women. He rarely contributes insight or leadership, but he's always present, commenting on minor details with misplaced gravitas. Van Patten's obsession with appearance over substance marks him as a symbol of 1980s consumerism. He brags about his clothes, corrects others on designers, and fixates on material trends. This makes him valuable in a world where surface matters more than soul, but also places a hard cap on his status. He's respected but not followed. Bateman sees Van Patten as useful cover, a peer whose blandness distracts from his own murderous urges. Van Patten asks no questions, offers no challenges. Carruthers is clearly different. Soft-spoken, sensitive, and awkward, he fails every test of masculine performance that the others impose. His homosexuality is subtly hinted at in the novel and openly portrayed in the film, culminating in a misguided romantic advance toward Bateman. The business card scene is where Carruthers' position is cemented. His card is mocked by the others, and his reaction, visibly wounded, exposes a depth of emotion the others refuse to show. In a world of masks, Carruthers is vulnerable. That makes him dangerous. Bateman's attempted murder of Carruthers in the restroom, thwarted only because Luis mistakes it for foreplay, is one of the film's darkest comedic moments. It underscores Carruthers' detachment from the group and Bateman's own spiraling frustration. And in American Psycho, status is communicated not through achievements but through symbols. Let's examine 3 major rituals through which hierarchy is established. Arguably the most famous in the film, this scene is a masterclass in silent status competition. Each card represents power, precision, and self-worth. The sequence plays like a duel, each man pulling out his weapon until Bateman is left broken, trembling at Paul Allen's superior card. This moment shows that Bateman, despite being a killer, is still insecure, still a boy among men in his own eyes. Allen, not part of the circle, defeats him with nothing more than taste. Fashion is currency. Van Patten excels here, but Bateman's detailed morning routine shows he takes it further. His entire identity is manufactured in his bathroom mirror. McDermott falls behind, with his safe, conservative wardrobe reflecting a lack of daring. Bryce is flashy but unrefined. Carruthers is neutral, stylish, yes, but trying too hard to fit in. Again, Bateman is the king of this game even if the crown doesn't fit. Reservations at places like Dorsia are the ultimate status symbols. Whoever controls the calendar controls the group. Bryce pushes the group to try new places. Bateman obsesses over Dorsia, but can't get in. This paradox highlights the absurdity of their system. Even the top predator can be denied by a maitre d'. Women are treated as trophies. They are dated, discarded, or shared with little emotional depth. Bateman's detached use of sex reflects his need when all factors are considered. Wit, influence, fashion, business card quality, control of activities. Here's how the hierarchy seems to stack up. 1. Timothy Bryce, the de facto leader in social settings. Loudest, most influential. 2. Patrick Bateman, the psychological center. Secretly dominant but insecure. 3. Craig McDermott, conservative echo chamber. Not a leader but an enabler. 4. David Van Patten, fashionable but irrelevant. More concerned with aesthetics than power. 5. Luis Carruthers, the outsider, emotionally present but socially absent. Ironically, Bateman sees himself as superior to all of them. Yet in practice he remains tethered to their approval, their systems, their games. His violence becomes a cry for recognition, a final, fatal attempt to assert true dominance in a world of meaningless status symbols. Moral detachment and In American Psycho, masculinity is not something these men possess inherently, it's something they perform. Every day is a stage, every movement choreographed, every sentence rehearsed for optimal social value. Bateman and his peers are engaged in a constant, exhausting act of being men, according to 1980s capitalist ideals. Dominant, indifferent, sexually aggressive, and utterly superficial. This performative masculinity forms the unspoken glue of Bateman's inner circle. But it also creates friction. They are not bonding over friendship, but aligning for survival. Any deviation, emotional vulnerability, genuine kindness, or weakness, is penalized. Examples of performed masculinity. Bryce jokes about date rape, not out of cruelty alone, but to demonstrate nonchalance, a performance of dominant detachment. And McDermott criticizes other races, religions, and sexualities, desperately clinging to outdated norms that make him feel secure. Van Patten parrots trends, hoping that participation equals power. Bateman works out obsessively, curates his skincare ritual, and crafts the perfect suit ensemble, not for fitness but to wear a masculine identity like armor. Even Carruthers, who deviates from the script, performs a version of masculinity he thinks will earn him acceptance, until he breaks the illusion by revealing his attraction to Bateman. This need to constantly perform creates a fragile ecosystem. These men are not friends, they are competitors playing the same role. The tension between individual identity and collective performance becomes unbearable, especially for Bateman, who eventually spirals into homicidal rebellion against the script. What's most striking in the group's dynamic is not what they say, but what they don't. Silence, half-heard names, and mistaken identities pervade their conversations. No one truly listens. When Bateman confesses his crimes, openly admitting murder, no one reacts. They don't hear him or don't care. Mistaken identity, a feature, not a bug. Paul Allen mistakes Bateman for Marcus Halberstram, and McDermott confuses someone for someone else from one of those firms downtown. Even Evelyn, Bateman's fiancée, seems unsure who he really is. This misidentification reflects the group's core philosophy. You are what you look like, not who you are. The men blend into one another, their personalities as interchangeable as their suits. Bryce, McDermott, and Patten are so obsessed with maintaining appearances that they have no interest in inner lives, even their own. Bateman's violent breakdown is, paradoxically, an attempt to be seen. Yet even his worst crimes are absorbed into the group's noise. He's invisible until he bleeds, and even then no one notices. Though these men operate at the top of the food chain socially, they are still trapped inside a capitalist and patriarchal structure that defines success in ways they can never fully achieve. In the hierarchy of Bateman's circle, Bryce may be loud and controlling, but is ultimately a prisoner of addiction and shallow pursuits. And McDermott clings to power through ideology, but is an intellectual fossil. Patten lacks critical thought and fades into irrelevance despite his fashion. Carruthers, while emotionally aware, is socially exiled. And Bateman? He sees himself as above them all, yet he's powerless to escape the very world he dominates. His attempts to assert control, through murder, manipulation, and confession, fail. Even in his confession to his Luis, Carruthers is the most tragic figure in the film. He does not belong to Bateman's hierarchy, but his presence reveals everything wrong with it. Carruthers doesn't participate in the group's games. He doesn't assert power, doesn't compete for dominance, and doesn't objectify women. Instead, he expresses affection, vulnerability, and emotional need. These are the very traits the others mock, fear, and violently suppress. When Carruthers confesses his love to Bateman in the restroom, Bateman draws out gloves, ready to strangle him, but cannot follow through. Carruthers' sincerity disarms him. In a world of masks, truth is unbearable. Carruthers functions as a moral foil, genuine in a group of fakes. Yet his marginalization shows that authenticity has no place in this world. He's invisible not because he fails to perform. At the end of American Psycho, we are left not with resolution, but with disintegration. The hierarchy among Bateman and his peers is not stable. It is a constantly shifting illusion based on appearances and approval. In such a world, Bryce leads socially but decays personally. McDermott repeats ideas but contributes nothing original. Patten wears the trends but has no substance. Carruthers sees the truth but is punished for it. Bateman dominates the hierarchy, only to realize it means nothing. Bateman's final monologue reveals the ultimate truth. This confession has meant nothing. He has clawed his way to the top of a meaningless mountain. The hierarchy he so desperately fought to master is hollow. The power he imagined having is performative like everything else in his life. The lesson here is brutal and profound. In a world where identity is constructed through brands, status symbols, and social domination, though set in the 1980s, American Psycho remains shockingly relevant. The tools have changed, Instagram instead of business cards, crypto wallets instead of Armani, but the performance remains the same. The desire to win through style, wit, and dominance continues to define many male social circles. Bateman's circle of vice presidents reflects a timeless truth. When status becomes more important than substance, no one wins. Everyone is pretending. Everyone is replaceable. And in the end, the only person listening